morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Mari Hall here. I'm an executive assistant and team coordinator for the U.S. Equity and Economic Opportunity Initiative. I am also a weekend caterer and a part-time caregiver to a lovely mother who is giving multiple sclerosis a run for its money. Welcome to RF Breakthrough. Overtime all the time, what working women need. Decade after decade, studies have shown that women in the workplace are overworked and underpaid, denied sick and maternity leave, and they face discrimination more frequently. Still, women only earn about 80% of what men earn on average, and that gap is even wider for Black and Latinx women at the rates of about 64% and 55%, respectively. During the pandemic, there was a spotlight on minority women. They were at the forefront of essential work for this country. These women bore the brunt of financial burdens with little to no emergency funds and an eligibility for social safety net payouts. Women are leaving the workforce in record numbers, forced to choose family over work as quality care is priced as a luxury and not a necessity. This alone results in a loss of about $20 billion each year just due to care responsibilities. And then we have women entrepreneurs who face more barriers around obtaining access to capital and credit than their male counterparts. This number is exacerbated for Black women, despite them actually being among the fastest growing number of entrepreneurs. The economy needs women in the workforce to thrive. With the breadth of challenges that we face today, we have brought together a dynamic panel of Rockefeller Foundation's EEO grantees who are currently fighting to dismantle the barriers and issues that are leaving women behind. During today's conversation, we will discuss both short-term and long-term solutions so that we can better support women in achieving a healthy work-life balance, securing social safety net benefits, and equity both in and out of the workforce. Thank you for joining us today, and we invite you to take part in the conversation. Comment below or post using the RF hashtag. So it's going to be hashtag RF Breakthrough. I'm really excited to be here, and I'm going to introduce our panelists. I am joined by Haydee Moreno. She is the Chief Operating Officer at Just Community, and she is taking care of the women down in El Paso, Texas. So thank you for being here with us, Haydee. So excited to have you. I have Leng Leng Chancey, who is the Executive Director of 9 to 5. Hey. I have Palak Shah, who is Director of Social Innovations at National Domestic Workers Alliance. Hello, Palak. And then I have Dr. Lakeysha Hallmon, who is the founder and CEO of Our Village United, taking care of the folks down in Atlanta. So thank you guys so much for being here. I'm going to jump right in. I just want to talk a little bit about the pandemic, and then we're going to move past that because obviously these issues for women have been long before the pandemic. But I do want to ask Palak, what did the pandemic reveal about domestic workers? You work for National Domestic Workers Alliance, and you guys work specifically with domestic workers. 91.5% of domestic workers in this country are women. So what did the pandemic reveal about them?
Well, thank you, Mari, for hosting us all together on this panel. The domestic workers of this country are, as you said, primarily the women who care for the most precious elements of our lives. They care for our homes, they care for our children, and they care for our seniors and those of us with any kind of disability. And the thing that unites this workforce is that they work in the privacy of other people's homes, and that in order for other work to happen in the economy, domestic workers have to go to work. And so what the pandemic really revealed to us and revealed is something that we've always known, which is that there's a whole cohort, and if you want, an army of women who, when are going to work in one direction, it's so that other people can go to work in a different direction, right? And what the pandemic revealed is how essential the care workforce and the domestic workforce is in our economy, and how undervalued it really is in the economy. When the pandemic began, we knew it was going to be devastating to domestic workers for a bunch of reasons. One of which was, as shelter in place was going into effect, by definition, domestic workers work in other people's homes. And so because there was so much that was unknown in the early days of the pandemic, we already knew that because domestic work is vulnerable work, that many of the workers are working in the shadows of the economy without worker rights and without protections. The pandemic really revealed the level of crisis that exists, not just for domestic workers, but many other precarious workers in the economy. When right at the beginning of the pandemic, we began a weekly survey of domestic workers across the country. And in April, in our earliest survey, 72% of respondents reported having no jobs for the following week. 80% with a high volume, 80% of workers, domestic workers that had a high volume of work, were reporting they had either no work or had lost more than 50% of their work. And that 94% of domestic workers reported that their coronavirus-related cancellations were initiated by the client, the household, not by them, right? And what we know was that domestic workers were losing work at a devastating rate, but also, for a whole bunch of historical and structural reasons, didn't have access and continue to not have access to the safety net in the ways that we expect to be available for when most workers in the economy lose work in a crisis like this. So, in summary, I would say, it's kind of what you said, Mari, right? Which is that pre-pandemic, we have known about the essential nature of domestic work, which is highly correlated with women's labor, both paid and unpaid. And what the pandemic revealed is how essential that work really is. And I think what the opportunity we have in front of us is to actually correctly right a bunch of historical wrongs as to why these workers are not protected, and also value this work correctly in our society and in our economy.
Yes, thank you. So the EEO's vision is that every working person can meet financial needs of their family. And one way to do this, and Palak, you mentioned this, is through a social safety net. What's missing in the social safety infrastructure? And Palak, you can answer this, or Leng Leng, you can answer
here,
this.
From another panelist, but for domestic workers specifically, it's a very difficult labor market because so many people are working and living in the shadows. We have high numbers of immigrants and undocumented immigrants working in the domestic work industry, which means that they don't necessarily have access to the same safety net and formal benefit services that many other workers in the economy have. But some of it is also just due to the structure of the work. We've built a safety net primarily around people who work 9 to 5 in one job with one employer. And that's just not true for the majority of how domestic work works. Like take, for example, a house cleaner. She may be working 40, 50, 60, 70 hours a week cleaning 20 or 30 different homes. But because she is both working informally, meaning she's in the cash economy, or because she doesn't work all of her hours with one employer, the safety net structure that we have in place doesn't necessarily protect her, even though she's working more hours than you might in a traditional 9 to 5 job.
Thank you. Leng Leng, I would love for you to jump in here and speak a little bit about some of the breakdowns in the social safety infrastructure.
Yes, thank you, Mari. The first thing I would ask is, where is the safety net? Right? Like EEOC is talking about it, but forever, for centuries or many, many decades, we've been talking about this issue for a very long time. Just like Palak, shared about, the care economy and the domestic workers and so much more, right? However, I think that the first question that we have, and I think that the most important thing about this pandemic and why all of a sudden, childcare, paid leave, paid sick time, paid, all of those things, those safety net issues are coming to the forefront is, number one, we have to recognize that it's because it's hurting the middle class, right? It's all embedded in classism, embedded in, sexism and all of the above. Right? This issue is not new, but because so many other, middle class white folks that have always have access, all of a sudden their access is cut off. So there's a huge change in how we perceive, these multiple issues right now. But again, these issues have been here for a long time. So at the beginning of the pandemic, we already saw what our members were going to face in the low wage working economy, and who mostly are frontline workers, right? You work a waitressing job, or you work at, in the back of a restaurant, and all of the above. And we knew that folks were going to hit hard as the restaurants were closing and all the other services were closing as well. And the childcare centers and everything else in between. So we got to work back in February of 2020, which was at the very beginning of the pandemic. We went out and we talked to many of our partners, and we raised quite a bit of money. And every week we were pushing out about $10,000 a week to help our community members. So, and it's funny because anybody can apply for it pretty much. You can apply for rent assistance, utilities assistance, emergency assistance, childcare assistance. The most, through what we have done, we saw that the most needed assistance that everyone was asking for was rent assistance.
Okay.
So, yeah. So folks have to choose between paying their rent, keeping their lights on, or feeding their family. So I think that these are really systemic structural problems that we really have to address.
Yes. Thank you for that, Leng Leng. So you did mention something, and I know that you work with low wage workers. 2/3 of low wage workers are women, and half of that number are brown women, Black and brown women. I want to know, what are some of the long-term solutions into closing that gender wealth gap? What does that look like? I mean, that answer might be long, it might be short, I don't know, but what are the long-term solutions? What can we do? What are the policies that'll really, really like start to close this gap? How can we see that gap close?
Well, can we take down patriarchy and racism? That is the question, I would ask to anybody. Like, we talk so much about structural oppression. I mean, we have to go back and ask ourselves,
Right.
can we take down patriarchy and racism? Because all the things that
Yes, we
we are
can.
oppressed by
We
stems
can
from that.
do it.
So I think
Absolutely.
it's time for us to be bold and talk about what these issues mean to our community members, right? I'm an organizer by trade, and listening to folks on the ground is what I do, and organizing folks on the ground. So, we have so much problem, but all these problems have a root cause. And we know the root cause of these problems are really patriarchy and racism and sexism and all of the isms that you can list and think of.
Right.
So I don't think this is a short-term, fixable problem, because that power dynamic in our society really has to shift, and the narrative of how we talk about these issues have to shift. Right? The
Absolutely.
one thing that I would say is, one of the things that 9 to 5 is consistently doing is pushing more radical policy changes. So one of the things that we did in Colorado was pass an um, equal pay, equal women's act, I believe. I can't remember the title, but basically one of the things in that policy change is that every employer have to publish the salary range for all jobs. Right? If you think about it, there's a job that's open, a man and a woman, or goes in and apply for the job, even a trans person, and then you add on like um, people that are from the BIPOC community going in to apply for these jobs, right? And it always says, at the bottom, so many people always says, depending on your experience, right, what your salary will be. And I think that's asking a lot. It's asking the woman that is going in, or the person going in to apply for this job, to ask themselves, what is their self-worth, right? How much am I actually worth? Am I worth $10 an hour? Am I worth $15 an hour? Or am I worth $5 an hour? It's not fair. Even like for folks that are working in the corporate sector, right? If you're applying for a director job in Coca-Cola, when a woman goes, she's asking from, like, oh, but back, at my last job, I was only working this much. So salary history, banning salary history is also important. So 9 to 5 have been on the forefront of pushing this policy change, and making sure that everyone, when you talk about equity and access, like these are really steps that we can actually take to increase equitable access. So I would encourage anyone in your organizations or partners that make sure that they publish the salary ranges for all jobs.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And yes, equity and access. I'm just going to take a quick pivot here, and we're going to go from women in the workforce to entrepreneurs. I had a conversation with Haydee sometime last week, and we talked about entrepreneurs and women. And a lot of the women that she's servicing down in El Paso, these women, they're entrepreneurs, and not necessarily by passion, but out of necessity, right? And they're still looking to they still need access to capital. They still need help. It's like, I have to stay home with my kid. I have a parent at home I need to take care of. I can't really get back into the workforce, go into the workforce, but I have to make money. What do I do? Do I start a home-based business? Do I start making tacos? Do I make t-shirts? Do I sell soaps? Right? But these women aren't necessarily looking to VCs for money. They need smaller money or less money, and they're still having a hard time. So, Haydee, can you talk a little bit about the systems that don't exist for these women and how you're making these systems exist, this trust-based system, and what these womanpreneurs, as I like to call them, as I call myself, and we'll get there in a little bit, these womanpreneurs, what do they need? How are you addressing some of their issues? Because again, necessity is one thing, passion is something different. So I would love to hear you speak a little bit about that.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us here. I'm excited. I wanted to just clarify that currently Just Community is in Austin, Texas, and that's where we're based, and in Dallas.
Okay.
Coming soon, thanks to Rockefeller support, to Houston and El Paso. That's right. So I think that as I'm listening to my fellow panelists, I think that there are themes that are consistent both in workforce and entrepreneurship. So the women that we serve are 42% of them are single moms, and female-headed households earn 2.5 times less than two-parent households, and 31% less than single male-headed households. And so what we see is that need for income in order to make ends meet that works with their schedule. And I completely agree with the idea of, if we didn't have to swim upstream against patriarchal systems, if we didn't have to swim upstream against racist systems, then I do think that it would be a lot easier to address some of this. So we talk to, I'm not an organizer by trade. I design products, but I do think that we have something similar, that in order to do that, you just have to really listen to users and understand what are their pain points, what are their needs, what are their obstacles. And what we hear a lot are people who enter into micro entrepreneurship for two reasons. One is, I could not find a job that would be flexible enough for my childcare. I have to drop off kids, I have to pick up kids, I have to, make sure that they have dinner. I can't afford daycare because that requires another full-time job salary. So we hear that on one end, that need, and our workforce, is informed by generations of a male-headed household who works outside of the house and comes back for dinner, and everything in the background is managed by her. And so we're that's one need that we've identified. And then the other one are those women who are just fed up. They're fed up by managers who are sexist, racist, both, who are they are not treated with dignity. They cannot be their authentic selves. and are just tired of that, and just that mental exhaustion of having to deal with that on a day-to-day basis, that they say, you know what, I need to find a better path, that is protecting my mental health. So what we do at Just is we design our products with her in mind. So what does she need? We start with small dollar loans, from start at 750 all the way up to 5,000 or 10,000 if you're a more formal business. But what we've learned is that it's not about getting her from, selling tamales out of her house on the weekends to opening a storefront. That's not her dream, actually.
Right.
Her dream is to care for her family, and what she cites most, the number one dream within Just Community is to own your home. And they see that as something that is stable for their family, for their kids. That's wealth that they can pass down. That's the contribution that they get really excited about that. So at Just, we said, okay, that's our roadmap. So we start with microloans. What's the path that gets them to homeownership? And so along that path, we're diving into refinancing high interest auto loans and credit cards, helping people with their credit score, down payment assistance. So all of that, but those are the milestones that she sets for her. We're really excited about entrepreneurship as a way for her to be able to have the flexibility that she needs, to be able to have the dignity and to acknowledge that self-worth that she deserves on her way to home ownership as that wealth building mechanism. That's what we get excited about.
That's exciting. Thank you for that. And to our viewers, don't forget to take part in this conversation. Either comment below or use our hashtag RFBreakthrough. Now I'm going to pivot a little bit to the womanpreneurs that do want to scale their businesses, the women that come in and say, I'm passionate about something, I really want to grow this business. And I'm going to go to Dr. Key. So for women that do want to scale their business, how important is it that we actually, you know what, let me just go something else. Why is technical assistance so important when we talk about womenpreneurs, especially Black womenpreneurs? And Dr. Key, you're doing some great work with our Village United, and I want you to speak a little bit to your work and how you are providing technical assistance in an actual space for people, for womenpreneurs and entrepreneurs of color, to showcase what they're doing so that they do have access to people to come and vet them, so they can get money, so they can go out in the world and like really grow and scale their business. So talk to us a little bit about that.
Sure. Before I answer that incredible question, it's such an honor to be here to share space and time with all these other incredible founders and innovators and all the women listeners. I understand the space that we occupy and how important our work is. And so it's also extremely important that we honor and see the light within each other. So thank you. Thank you, Rockefeller, for having us. Now, to answer this incredible question, I have the honor and pleasure of serving some rock star women founders. These women are breaking generational curses, building legacy that they didn't traditionally see for themselves. Women in the village under our Village United are sole proprietors, majority, and across the country for Black entrepreneurs. That is the target market for Black entrepreneurship. And so when we think about the work that we do, how are we supporting Black women founders to accelerate growing from a single member operator to scaling their team, to then opening their own locations or having these thriving e-commerce businesses? What we do is very similar to what's happening here today. We have conversations based on where are you now? Where would you like to go? Can we look inside of your business and learn what the gaps are? That's why technical assistance is so important. When you have technical assistance, someone is identifying the problems and not simply saying, I don't know about this, I see all the problems. Technical assistance says, let's look at it problem by problem solution by solution. And when you present yourself to a funder, to a CDFI, if you're getting a small loan, then what we are helping with the village is ensuring that these people are coming loan credit ready. And that takes being able to look inside of a woman's business and looking at it from peer to peer as well, and saying, let us help you with your legal, let us help you with your accounting to make sure that you're filing your taxes. Do you truly have a marketing plan? What is a marketing plan? Why is that important? And then branding your product to be able to meet what whoever this target customer is. But the process of entrepreneurship for women is to be nimble. Is to understand probably the roots of why you started your business. And I love what the fellow sister is doing in Texas, and understanding that most people are creating their business out of state of survival. They simply want to create something that their children can eat and survive and their families can trust. But the cool thing about when you're in an ecosystem of other women who are doers and innovators, women can start that way and be extremely surprised that they can create an enterprise. Because when women founders create businesses, then more jobs are secure for other women founders. There's an emotional IQ that is necessary to be able to see people where they are and how to push them forward. And then that level of intimacy with women founders, that level of vulnerability that is so necessary, that I'm hoping that the pandemic opened our heart space for, to be able to be vulnerable and to talk about where we are in its place in our business, and to systematically talk about how to be disruptive, as my fellow sister in Atlanta is doing, being radically, radically honest that when Black businesses, brown businesses traditionally go to banks, they're denied. They're denied because the bank, the institution, is designed to deny them. And unless we can have this real conversation about that, then we're going to continue to just shoot out blanks. Nothing is going to happen other than more women are going to be denied. So systematically, the banking system, the loan system has to be reevaluated and simply change. Only reevaluating it and talking about it is just talk. And I think we're beyond that. What are the systematic changes that's going to reduce the barrier of ensuring that women get the capital that they need to establish the credit that they need to be able to sustain? Because one thing I know to be true, we can bet on women founders. We saw it
Yes.
in the pandemic. We saw women founders open up businesses, and those businesses scaled when the world was shutting down, and women were able to hire more women. So if we're thinking about risk adverse investments, then why not invest in a population that is tested, tried, and true, regardless of what the systemic racism is in these systems and practices? Because I think it says a lot that entrepreneurs, Black women entrepreneurs, are able to scale and accelerate against all these odds, that I think is very important for us to talk about. So I hope I answer your question.
Oh no, you answered my question. That was great. I also had another conversation, and one thing that's extremely important, and I would love everybody to just kind of chime in on this one thing. It's not specific to, to entrepreneurship, but how important is it to see women in leadership? And I think Dr. Key spoke a little bit to that when women are in leadership or in higher places, they can hire more women. And there's an emotional intelligence that comes with that women have, right? How important is it to see women in leadership? And I mean, I'm talking about on the political front, on the VC front, at CDFIs. What does that really mean? What would that look like if we had more women in leadership? And really, how do we get them there? So anybody jump in, because that might be a bit of a loaded question, but I think it's really important for us to kind of talk about that.
I will be brief since I just finished talking, but I will say, yes, it's important to have women in leadership, but it's important to have the right woman in leadership. So it's important that as women are placed in position, that we are intentional in understanding why we have been placed in position. So what we cannot do is do what has been done to us generationally. We get into a space, in a place, and then we become the barrier for other women. So I think it has to be a mindset shift when we assume leadership positions, to understand what the clear mission is, that we are gatekeepers and gate openers for other women, and to ensure when we get into place that we are disrupting what's happening internally. But I'll pause there and pass it over to everyone else.
Okay. Ling Ling, you want to jump in? I saw you nodding vigorously.
Sure, I'm just nodding my head. I'm just completely, and we definitely have to get in touch after this panel discussion, Dr. Keys. Yeah. So I'm just nodding my head because that is a huge question. I think that everything that was said before is so accurate, right? You got to find the right people to be in the right position. However, again, I'm gonna beat this dead horse to a pulp by saying we also really have to examine the race issue that is compounded for Black and brown women, right? And leadership. How many times have I been challenged because I'm not a white woman? How many times? When I go to federal table meetings, how many times do I have to make my elbows really wide and cuss to get their attention? Right? So all of these things are really true barriers for women of color in leadership. That, people are so quick to talk about racial justice, supporting women of color leadership, but I really want to see how are they really supporting women of color leadership, right? I think that has to be the focus if you really want to change and pivot the narrative.
Palak, would you like to jump in there?
Yeah, I think our context is a bit different in the social movement. We are a feminist movement. We, as an organization, are a women of color-led organization, and so much of that reflects who the workforce actually is. When you think about who are the domestic workers of this country, it is predominantly, women of color and Black and brown women. And so I think, of course, we see there's a pragmatism to it in terms of actually doing things that matter to the people that we represent and we serve. But there's also something about creating an alternative space and reality that actually is living the world that we are seeking to build in the same way, right? And so both things are happening, and we're also meeting the mission of our movement, right? We're continuing to push forward on workers' rights and immigrant rights and a whole bunch of rights, given that our social movement anyway has a whole person politic and approach to the issues that we want to take on, all of which is led by women of color, domestic workers on our board and our worker councils and our chapters and our organizing. And I think it's been I forgot, for a while, because I've been with the domestic worker movement now for 8 years. And I forgot what it's like to not work in a woman of color led environment. And when I hear stories from our workers or I hear stories from other colleagues, I am reminded about how brutal it really is. You have to kind of work twice as hard, be twice as good, and have, half, if even, quarter the opportunities. So, it's really important, I think, to your question, Mari, in all of the work that we're doing, whether it's in kind of formal business and corporate settings or in social movement spaces and philanthropy, that we are really investing in women leadership, particularly.
I agree. Haydee, you want to jump in there?
I'll just add I agree with what's been shared. I was reflecting on my own experience, because I think that initially the question, you can kind of think of like, oh, what do these poor women need, and maybe they need to see more women. And I was thinking about that. I was like, oh, actually, I need to see more women in leadership positions. And if I reflect on my own experience, it is. I think that Pollock, I do get used to just having difficulty connecting with CEOs that I meet or funders that I meet, and just kind of struggling to like, where can I find an in where we can kind of have any kind of connection here? And whenever I do have those conversations with a person of color or a woman, and especially a woman of color, then you just like, it's this instant like, oh, hey, like I know you, you know me, like, so, and it's just easier to get into the actual meat of the thing, right? And so I think that that's just something that I wanted to point out. Of it's, it's easy to point out like blatant racism and blatant sexism, and I don't think that happens as often. But what does happen is just this inability to connect, which then creates a barrier. And whether that barrier is erected intentionally or not doesn't matter, because the barrier exists. And so then we have to figure out ways to like go under the barrier, go around it, go over it by working twice as hard, by trying, right? And so I think that it is really important to have just a more representative leadership across industries, in order for us to begin to really systemically address this.
And related to that, one thing that I wanted to quickly raise, which is an adjacent point, because part of my role at the Alliance is to lead our innovation lab, right, which is about disruptive innovation by workers, domestic workers, for domestic workers, and creating the right container for that kind of innovation to happen from within the social movement. And one of the things that I've observed over the years of doing this work is that women of color have very little room for failure in the way that others in the popular discourse around innovation and disruption and entrepreneurship have. So the rhetoric around the room for failure, the trial and error, the ability to pivot, there's just less maneuverability and room for women who want to do that, whether it's in the social movement context, whether it's just as a solo entrepreneur, whether it's in a traditional founder context, that we continuously that rhetoric doesn't apply in the same way, and then raises the stakes and the pressure in a disproportionate way.
Great. Thank you guys for that. I think that's very important. So I just want to kind of not end here, but I do want to talk about getting women back to work. I mentioned earlier at the top of this conversation that so many women are taking care of loved ones, whether they be children, partners, parents, aunts, uncles. We are bearing that brunt. And so many of those women cannot go into the workforce because there's just not affordable quality care. There are some real breakdowns in the care economy and the care infrastructure as well. Are there any tools, are there any programs and policies for women looking to re-enter the workforce post-pandemic, but they're still the primary caregivers? What does that look like? How does getting back into the work, how does that even work right now? I think about my own sister. So my mom has multiple sclerosis. She's been in a wheelchair for I would say she's actually been in a wheelchair for 10 years. She's been in a wheelchair for 10 years, and she got really sick during the pandemic and at the beginning of the pandemic in April, and had to live with my sister. So she lives with my sister, and my sister's job, she works in finance. They're gearing up to go back to work. And our RF is like, okay, come September, you guys can come into the office. So my 2 days are about to be done at my sister's house. And like, what does that look like? How do we, like, do I say I can't work, or I have to work remote? I can't go back into work. Does my sister have to say, you know what, I'm going to have to drop my 9 to 5 in finance, and maybe she's going to have to pick up, she loves making empanadas. Maybe she has to pick up an empanada business so that she can stay home and take care of mom. Or are there some policies? Do there need to be policies? What are the tools? What are the programs to really get us back into the workforce and into the, making and generating money in the economy, but still make sure that our loved ones are taken care of, that we can afford, and it's good quality care. It almost doesn't exist. I mean, that's a huge thing in our family. We talk about it all the time. So what does that look like? How do we get back into the workforce? Leng Leng, you want to pick that one up?
Sure. I'll just start by saying that first, we really have to quantify what kind of work women are getting back into, right? Because every kind of sector or industry face their own struggles, right? However, as caregivers, primary caregivers in your home, we don't have the kind of safety net that exists to help us, right? I mean, the influx of a lot of money from the care packages, from the rescue plan is great. However, these are one-time investments, right? If we don't use the money wisely right now, 10 years from now, we are going to be still sitting here having these conversations and nothing much has changed. Right. So I think you have to have different plans to target for different industries and sectors where women are working. And the next thing I would say is that in order for women to go back to work, we also have to take a look at what are the things that they need immediately, right? If you can't collect unemployment to pay for rent and you're already 3 months behind rent, how are you going to get back to work and pay for childcare? And I think that one of the biggest things about when folks talk about, economic justice and all of these things, we're not really taking into consideration the worker as a whole person, right? Many of us, fall into this movement by fixing one area of the workers' problem, but not the entirety of their problem. But we all know we wear multiple hats. I'm a mom, I'm an organizer, I'm a caregiver, I am a aunt, so many different roles that we play. So how do you center the person as a holistic entity and build programs around and policies around that individual to begin with, right? So I think that this is a long-term fight unless we can really truly invest in our communities, especially in BIPOC communities. I don't think much is going to change, but more is going to be demanded of women of color.
A lot of this boils down to, I think, from our perspective, kind of having been working on the care economy for decades now, right, is twofold. One is that for so long, we've attributed the care crisis to the realm of the individual family as a problem the individual family needs to solve. And if we weren't solving it correctly, it was kind of our fault. We had the wrong job, or we made the wrong decisions, or we didn't sign up for the right daycare, or whatever it was, right? That it's kind of something that every family, similar to you, Mari, is struggling with. This is not an isolated occurrence. Everybody across the economy, especially during the pandemic, was going through the same level of impossible choices. And part of, I think, what we really need to do as a society, and I think we have some ideas on how we can move in this direction, is to take this crisis out of the realm of the individual and reframe it as something, as a collective challenge and a collective problem that we do need a policy solution for. The other thing is, I think about how we reframe our understanding of care as essential infrastructure, both in the economy and in our society. That just like roads and bridges, just like a robust education system, just like, agencies that help us have clean air and clean water, that care is an essential component of the infrastructure of the society and the country that we want to build. And that in order to do that, we would have to invest the way that we invest in infrastructure, the way that we invest in roads and bridges. We would have to invest in building an entirely new set of infrastructure and scaffolding that allows for all of us to thrive, in our lives. So I think, there are small steps to that. We're seeing that, right? And I think you're right about the one-time nature of the federal economic relief. On the other hand, we're seeing right now in the American Jobs Plan, a kind of a proposal for, $400 billion investment into the care economy, into in-home and community support services that would, essentially both increase the wages of the people who are providing this care, but also increase the amount of care that's available for somebody like you, Mari, in that situation, to support the ability to go to work and the ability to ensure your mom is taken care of without being forced to make impossible choices every single day. It's a down payment. It's an opportunity for us to re-articulate and reimagine what a care infrastructure looks like. And we have that in front of us right now, at least one opportunity to begin this process of restructuring what we value.
Thank you. And in terms of investment, Dr. Key and Haydee, you guys are working again with womenpreneurs, and by investing in them financially, we're also investing in keeping money in our communities. So I just really wanted to highlight that and thank you guys for that because it's extremely important. And as we're coming to a close, this is definitely not an end because the end for women, the fight for women never stops. I just wanted to kind of recap. A lot of what we talked about today was about community, equality, closing the gender wealth gap, investing in women that are investing in themselves and how important that is to the community, organizing and rallying for women, having real, transparent, honest conversations about patriarchy, about racism, about sexism. How do we break down those barriers so that we can get women in the playing field at the top? But one thing that really stuck out to me was equity. Equity, equity, equity. This fight is all about equity. We really need equity. And here at the Rockefeller Foundation, we're trying to spark a national conversation and a global one too about what equity means because we know that equity is opportunity. And we've gotten some really, really meaningful responses. Check them out.
Equity is balance, the ability to not just survive, but to thrive.
I also think of equity as a process that is marked with fairness, one in which people have an equal voice in decision making, and one in which we're represented in all aspects of society.
I think of equity as the ability to live into and realize the fullness of one's own individual humanity.
Equity is recognizing that the opportunities and resources provided to us when we start our journey in life is not equal, and finding ways to acknowledge that imbalance and equalizing it.
For me, equity is opportunity. What does equity mean to you? Share your thoughts, comments, artwork, videos, and please tag it with #EquityIsOpportunity.
Wow, such insightful answers to what equity means. I would love to know what equity means to you all, but I'm first going to go. To me, equity is access. Access to benefits, access to capital, access to quality education, quality care, quality food. Access, access, access. Equity is opportunity. So I would love to know what equity means to you, to your organizations. And I'm going to start with Haydee. What does equity mean to you?
Yeah, I love that. I've been mulling over it since you framed it for us. I think that for me personally, equity is tied to authenticity, but then that doesn't quite get it. It's about being able to safely be authentic. So equity is showing up and being able to be your whole self. Your mom, to be a mom, to be an aunt, to be a Mexican American woman, to love who you love, and to be able to do that safely, and that to me is equity.
Thank you, Dr. Key. I saw you thinking over there.
I'm still thinking. You did? Yeah, I'm still thinking. No, I have an answer. I have a working answer. And so I look at equity from two lenses. As a Black woman and championing entrepreneurs, equity is fair, consistent, and without restraints. Equity is disruptive of privilege. Equity is ensuring that there is space for narrative telling, that is honest, that is sincere, that solutions come behind that. Equity isn't charity. Equity is advancement and understanding when you invest in women, the entire community, our country prospers. So everyone is a byproduct of that investment.
Absolutely. Thank you. Palak, equity.
To me, equity means that you matter just as much as anybody else.
Oh, that's great. That's it. I love that. Yeah, that was boom. Ling Ling, over to you. Equity.
Oh, so many things, but I would just say that equity means, I mean, all of the above, as my fellow sisters have shared, but also on top of that, equity means there is no racism, there is no patriarchy, unless we can talk about, those root causes, like deep seated historical challenges that we have. How do we even start with talking about equity?
Thank you, Ling Ling. So, in our last few minutes, I just want to give you each an opportunity to present a call to action to whom you find it most useful. So, I'm going to go in the reverse and I'll go back to Ling Ling. You can start and then I'll kind of reverse that. So, a call to action to whom you find it most useful.
So I'm not sure who will be watching this, who is watching right now, but I would say that my thing that I would like for folks to start advocating for is publishing the salary history. I mean, publishing the salary ranges for jobs. I think that is an easy step for all organizations, folks in philanthropy, folks in so many other sectors and industry in the corporate sector. Like that is a easy, I think that is a quick step or the fast thing that folks can advocate for.
Thank you. Haydee, coming to you. Call to action to whom you find it most useful.
Yeah, I think the call to action for me would be with employers, and to have this conversation in spaces of employers who are decision makers around um, work schedules and flexibility. And I think that we just lived through a massive disruption and realized that, hey, like the way that we have structured our work week and work day turns out isn't there isn't anything magical about it or special about it. It can be disrupted, and turns out we can still do all of the work that we need to do. And so, can we keep that? And rather than everybody trying so hard to like, can we please get back to normal? It's like, can we please not? And can we figure out what's better? Because a lot of low wage workers are 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 being are surviving right now, and suffering in a way that isn't necessary. And so my call to action is for employers to jump onto this conversation. I hope that they're out there listening, and just start with the conversation, and what does it look like, and how might we do better, without sacrificing all of this other stuff around profits and productivity and efficiency, but just making it a little bit easier for our workers.
Got it. Palak.
Well, as I mentioned, we have a really rare opportunity as a country to make a big pivot in the way that we see care as infrastructure. This is a live proposal right now around a $400 billion investment into the care economy that both improves the crisis that we've all been talking about that women unfairly shoulder in our society. And what we need is we're organizers, so we need business leaders, and we need worker groups and women's groups and entrepreneurs, and everybody will benefit from an investment in a robust care infrastructure. And we have an opportunity that is large in scope, very large. A $400 billion investment is unheard of in the care economy. We've got a president of the United States and a vice president of the United States who are advocating for investments in the care economy. We've never been closer to a shift in the way that we value care and invest in care. And if we can actually get this across the finish line, I think we will look back in history and say this was the turning point when we actually moved care out of the realm of the individual crisis that each family is suffering through, and began the process of building a collective infrastructure and set of solutions for all of us.
Absolutely. Thank you. Dr. Key.
Yes, my call to action to investors, funders, banking institution, fund women. Fund every woman that's a part of this conversation today because the results are imminent. They are already doing the work. And also for banking institutions, disrupt the underwriting process. It is biased and it is inequitable at this point. So evaluate the underwriting process, create new systems, and diversify underwriters. And to Black women entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs as women, the call to action is keep creating, keep innovating, and continue to create space. Everything that you are thinking, everything that you have been called to do is needed and necessary.
Yes, and I'm going to end with my call to action to philanthropies, to large corporations. Thank Black women, invest in Black women, hire women of color, Latinx women, BIPOC women, hire us. We exist, we're here, we're educated, we are of great quality, and we should not have to prove that to anyone. So invest, hire, and invest. That's all I got. Thank you guys so much. It's been an honor to be here. You guys were great. And I hope that everyone watching is walking away with something and that they can go out and invest in women.
Thank you, Mari.
Thank you, Mari.
Guys.